I'm beginning a new series in which we are going to work through the first 3 chapters of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, as a way of exploring some of life's most important questions. Questions like, who are we? Where are we? Why are we here? And what is the problem with where we are? Why is the world the way it is? Why are we the way we are? And what is the solution? How will we ever get out of this mess we're in? And I'm calling this series Origins because these are the original questions that every civilization, tribe, group, family, and person asks when sorting out the meaning of life or when trying to make sense of what life is and how life works. And so today we begin our quest for answers by going all the way back to the beginning, to the opening words of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, page 1 in your Bible if you have it open, where we read, "In the beginning, God." Not in the beginning I, not in the beginning you, not even in the beginning we. It's in the beginning God. And there will be time for us to get to the I and the you and even the we later. We're not unimportant. We have a role to play in the story. We're just not primary. And so just a few words into this story, and we've already come upon a difficult truth, one we're going to stumble over time and time again. And that is that we are not the main characters in this story. God is. We are not the center of the universe. God is. Which is why, when searching for answers to life's most important, pressing, and certainly difficult questions, the place to begin is with God, who in the beginning created the heavens and the earth. And immediately, this opening line in Genesis, the first line in our Bibles, throws us into a massive debate, doesn't it? But it's not the debate we moderns typically assume. This is not a debate between faith and science. This is not a debate about whether our world is the product of random chance, a big cosmic accident, or is our world the creation of God. That's not the debate this story is jumping into. It's not the debate this storyteller is interested in. In the ancient world where this story was originally composed and told, it was a given that the heavens and the earth, that our world was the result of divine activity. Every civilization had some kind of creation story or myth in which they attributed the existence of our world to divine activity, to the work or sometimes the warfare of their particular gods. So the debate this story in Genesis 1 is jumping into is not, was the world made by God? The debate is around what kind of God made the heavens and the earth. And even more specific, this is a Jewish creation story. So the question is, how is the God of Israel different from and better than all the other so-called gods of Israel's neighbors? And the answer to that question is the key that unlocks all the other answers to life's most important and pressing questions. Before we probe deeper into Genesis 1 in pursuit of those answers, today I'd like us to pause here after this opening line and dwell upon a basic but crucial distinction embedded in these words. And to help us do that, I invite you to try out this fun thought exercise from Michael Whitmer's book, Heaven is a Place on Earth. Take a moment and consider how you might arrange these words on the screen according to their level of being. How you might rank or order these words on the screen according to their level of being. And if you're listening rather than watching, the words on the screen in no particular order: angel, rose, rock, donkey, God, and human. And I'm asking you, how would you rank these? How would you order them according to their level of being? And you may be sitting there thinking, this is so easy, it's obvious. You would rank them in ascending order, beginning at the bottom with a rock, and then a rose, and then a donkey, and then a human, and then an angel, and then, of course, God. And that may seem obvious to you. Now, there is room for some theological debate about whether or not angels are above humans or humans are above angels because human beings are created in the image of God. That is a wonderfully fascinating, engaging theological debate for somebody else at some other time. Today, for our purposes, I'm going with the translation of Psalm 8:5, which says God made humanity a little lower than the angels. So this will be our order that we'll work with. Now, if I were to ask you to now draw a line between the two subjects on this screen where there is the greatest level of difference, draw a line demarcating the greatest level of distinction between these subjects on the screen, where would you draw the line? And as an example of being challenged to draw a line, I show you this vegan billboard. This is what I'm asking you to do. It says all animals want to live, but where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between pets and food? The carnivore comes along and says, I draw it right about here. Had someone point out after first service, it really depends on how hungry you are where you draw the line. Well, where would you draw the line for these subjects on the screen to show their greatest level of difference? It's relatively easy to rank them according to their level of being. But where's the greatest difference? Well, it's not the difference between a donkey and a rose, nor is it the difference between a human and a donkey. It's not even the difference between an angel and a human. No, the greatest level of difference, the greatest distinction is between God and everything else. And it's not even close. Genesis 1, the opening line of the Bible, draws the line between God and what God created. Reality can be broken down into two basic categories. Here's what is real. There is God, and there is everything else. There is God and what God has created. There is God and creation. This is the first, most important place to draw the line, to make a distinction when considering creation's relationship to its creator. Unfortunately, many of us, when we're asked to draw a line of distinction, draw a vertical line instead of a horizontal line because we want to break creation into two separate categories, between the physical and the spiritual, the temporary and the eternal, the natural, supernatural, the good and the evil part of creation. But as we'll see next week, this is an inappropriate place to draw the line. God's creation does not have a vertical line drawn through it, separating it into two different material or spiritual categories. No, the best, the most appropriate, dare I say, the right place to draw the line is horizontally between God and what God has created. Now, why does any of this matter? Because first, it's good to be reminded of this line and to remember where we are below the line so that we don't take ourselves too seriously. It's also a good reminder that we are not to take anything else that exists with us in the created order too seriously. So what do you call it when we pledge our ultimate allegiance to or put our undying trust in or base our sense of worth and significance on or organize our lives around anything in creation? You call it idolatry. What is idolatry? Idolatry is when we worship anything that exists below the line. Idolatry is what happens when we take creation more seriously than we take the Creator. This distinction also tells us what to expect as we begin to study a story whose main character is categorically different from everything else in creation. God is uncreated being, and everything else depends upon God for its existence. In this sense, we have more in common with a rock. And some of us have more in common with a rock than others. But we all have more in common with a rock than we have with God. Because as uncreated being, not dependent on anything else for existence, God is in a completely different category from everything else in creation. Which means that God, who has no beginning, but is the God of the beginning, is beyond the understanding of any created being. As one theologian puts it, God is mysterium tremendum. God is the tremendous mystery. God is other. God is set apart. God is holy. And so in our search, we don't discover God and then claim God for ourselves because we discovered God before anyone else did. Nor do we comprehensively define God, as if we're able to stand back and capture all that God is and assign words to what it is we're experiencing. We do not set boundaries for God or set limits on what God can or cannot or will not do. We do not have the ability to describe God unless God first gives us the words. The only way that we as created beings can know the God who is uncreated is for this God to reveal God's self to us, which is what God does throughout the Scriptures. Which is why we place a priority on studying and better understanding the Scriptures, including these stories from Genesis we're going to read this summer. Because we believe and we have experienced that we come to know this mysterious God better through the stories and through the Scriptures that God uses to reveal God's self to us. But even then, we have to be realistic and acknowledge that God's revelation to us is still incomplete and partial. Even when we bring the most important questions we have to God and we get some kind of answer back from God through the Scriptures, God's answers to our ultimate questions often generate more questions than answers. And this is the way it has to be. Any God we completely understand, or any God whose ways make perfect sense to us, can't possibly be God, but is instead a figment of our imagination, an idea of our own creation, an image of God that exists in our heads that is actually an idol, something we've created rather than something God reveals to us. If our study and pursuit of God doesn't lead us deeper into mystery, if we don't at times find it overwhelming, if it doesn't increase our humility before God, we're not actually studying or pursuing God. If the first difficult truth in this story is we are not the main characters in this story, the next hard truth is that our ability to understand our Creator as created beings is limited. And we have to accept the limitation. The first answer to our questions about life is that we have to accept that some of the answers we seek are beyond our comprehension. And just like Job learned in his story when he asked questions about the purpose and nature and reasoning for his suffering and his family's suffering, sometimes the best we can do is to sit in the mystery with God. And this can be challenging for those of us who have an irrepressible need to have and know all the answers, who don't like leaving any stone unturned, who don't like leaving any question unanswered. It's a challenge for us to accept and admit we are limited creatures who cannot possibly fully understand or comprehend the ways of our Creator. Which is why this distinction is so helpful to me. Because we must always remember that we exist below the line. And as we will see in coming weeks, we human beings get ourselves in a lot of trouble, and we cause a lot of trouble for the world when we try to jump above the line and assume the place of God so that we can know what God knows. It was our desire to have the knowledge of good and evil that started to get us in the mess we're in the first place. So this distinction helps us begin to understand why we're in a mess, why we are in trouble. Perhaps from our perspective, it asks us to embrace some bad news. We are limited. There are answers to questions we'll never understand. But this distinction also sets us up to appreciate the good news of the gospel. Because in the story told throughout the Scriptures, the good news is that God is not content to remain above the line shrouded in mystery. Nor is God willing to leave us down here below the line, stuck in the trouble we've made for ourselves. Instead, it is God who crosses the line. It is God who crosses the line and comes down to us to become one of us to save us from and to show us how to get out of the mess we're in. We must accept that we exist below the line, but we also celebrate that our Creator God, who exists above the line, has come down to be with us in Jesus Christ. So today, let's go to the table and celebrate our Creator God, who has come down and come near to be with us in Jesus Christ.